This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 982 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, thanks for tuning in. I do this series of episodes every year. I bring on a guest, and we talk about the quarterback, running back, and wide receiver classes for that particular upcoming NFL draft. So it's 3 episodes with 3 separate guests. Some of you may be wondering why this isn't just a late round perspectives episode instead. And the answer is because I'm talking about a very specific topic here. Perspectives, that's a conversation that just jumps all over the place. The Late Round Podcast is either a solo show with just me, or if I have guests on, we're focused on something super specific. Like today we're focused on this year's quarterback class. And the we is yours truly and my longtime friend, Shedeur Sanders. Jim and I worked together for a long time at Number Fire and FanDuel. He's hopped on the show for many years now to talk about quarterbacks because he has a really interesting quarterback model that's done quite well in the past. Just last year, he was telling everyone that Jayden Daniels was the QB1 in that draft class. Jim and I sat down and had a quick conversation about his quarterback model and this year's draft class. I think you guys are going to love it, especially when you hear who his model likes best this year. It's kind of a surprise. So let's get right to it. Here's my conversation with Mr. Shedeur Sanders. So Jim, for the listeners who aren't aware of your quarterback prospecting work and the model that you've developed, can you sort of describe it and what goes into it?
Yeah, so I have 2 separate models. One is a pre-draft model, one is a post-draft model. The post-draft one obviously influenced heavily by draft capital. The pre-draft one, honestly, I kind of use for like betting, like NFL draft props when I could, RIP Illinois. So I used it for betting, so I kept like draft capital out of there. But honestly, I've wound up liking that model more because it looks at just the player's age, experience, and efficiency. Nothing else, no expected draft capital, nothing like that. Literally just their collegiate resumes. And what you're looking for ideally is a quarterback prospect who is young, experienced, and efficient. And you don't get a lot of guys who check all 3 boxes. In fact, it's a very small list we'll talk about later on. But generally, players who are higher ranked in that model that blends those things together do tend to both go higher in the draft and be better as pros compared to contemporaries taken in similar spots in the draft. So if we be more specific, looking from 2010 on, we have, looking at just first-round quarterbacks from 2010 on, 14 of those guys have finished inside the top 10 in total EPA by Number Fire's metrics in 1/3 of their qualified season. So 14, like, star, really good first-round picks. Those guys have been, on average, in the 82nd percentile of the pre-draft model. And that includes Josh Allen and Jordan Love, who are very low, which tells you how high up the other guys in that subset are. The less successful first-round picks have been in the 70th percentile. So 70th for the less successful guys, 82nd percentile for the hits. It's a pretty big gap. And in general, if you look at like the specific buckets, the hits are younger, more experienced, and more efficient than their counterparts on average. Then I've always looked at it through the lens of first-round picks because most successful quarterbacks are first-rounders, but it's true for late-round guys too, honestly. And again, if you look at the average successful non-first-round picks since 2010, they've been in the 74th percentile of the pre-draft model, whereas the average day 2 or day 3 pick is in the 49th percentile. Now, it's 7 guys because there aren't a lot of successful non-first-round picks, but Jalen Hurts ranks number 2 overall among all quarterbacks in the history of the model. Russell Wilson is the only other non-first-rounder inside the top 10. Both those guys are now Super Bowl champions, which is pretty good there. So I do think that prioritizing these buckets, young, efficient, experienced, is good even when you're comparing to players who had similar spots in the draft, which is why I continue to evaluate and have grown to like the pre-draft model more than I used to initially when I built it.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like young and experienced. And, you know, we've talked about this in the past because this is what, like your 4th year coming on to talk about quarterbacks. But it feels similar to what we look at it like wide receiver, or it's all based on the fact that you're breaking out in a way, not even breaking out necessarily, but you're talented enough that you're good enough to be able to essentially start at the collegiate level as a freshman or as a sophomore and early on in your college career. And that then is telling that you're talented. Is that basically what that data is saying?
100%. You want to force the coaching staff's hand to play you right away. And I think that's important part when we're talking about age too, because last year, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, both older than average, but they both started as true freshmen at their respective colleges and then started throughout their entire career. So yes, they were older, but they also had tons of experience. So it's those two things kind of working in tandem. Like if you are not as experienced, but you're younger, you're a quarterback who is good enough to declare early, Caleb Williams, a ton of experience. Trevor Lawrence, I guess, kind of did. But if you're young enough to declare early, that's kind of offset by the age. So it's kind of the biggest red flags, the guys who check neither, but it is a red flag if you only check one of those boxes. Well, preference is for you to check both.
Right. So you're really saying if there's a late breakout quarterback who is also a little bit older, that's a red flag.
Oh, yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
If you're looking at busts in the history of the NFL draft, a lot of guys will wind up falling in that bucket where it's guys who are either, older and not experienced. That's your Mitchell Trubisky bucket.
Yeah.
There are a lot of guys who fall in that bucket.
So you're looking at it from this perspective of age and efficiency. If you were to really dumb this down, what do you think people get wrong when they're evaluating quarterbacks from a numbers-driven lens? Because, I'll say that I don't have a quarterback model, as many people know. It's a really difficult thing to do and to really manage and to, fully comprehend. So what do you think that folks might get a little bit wrong as they're evaluating quarterbacks?
I think it really is the age and experience thing. Anyone can look at efficiency numbers and be like, okay, cool. Mac Jones is awesome. Mac Jones is great in college, so maybe Mac Jones will be a good pro. You can do that anyway. But the age and efficiency blend really does matter a lot. And specifically, we're looking at busts. So there are 15 first round picks who have never had a season inside the top 15 in total EPA with a minimum of 3 years in the league. So not counting Anthony Richardson yet, guys like that, or Bryce Young, throwing them out. Of those 15, we'll call them busts. Of those 15 busts, 8 of them had 30 or fewer games with at least 10 pass attempts in college, so more than half, and 6 of them were older than 22 and a half years old on day one of the draft. The only guy who was in neither bucket, either older than he'd want or less experienced than he'd want, was Paxton Lynch. So Paxton Lynch, a bust, wasn't the most efficient quarterback, so you probably could have seen that one coming there. But most of these guys who wind up falling short are guys who don't check both those boxes. And honestly, that's coming up again this year because people are talking about Tyler Shuck, who is 87 years old. He is the 4th oldest quarterback invited to the Combine since 2010. It's Brandon Weeden, then 2 undrafted guys who are older than him. And he also has only 31 games of experience. So we're seeing it pop up again. Age does matter. Lamar Jackson was young coming out. So was Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jordan Love. Even the guys the model gets wrong, like Allen and Love, they tend to be younger. So I think that just kind of focusing on age and focusing on experience level, especially the two of them together, is something that we don't quite value enough, I don't think.
It's really interesting. This quarterback class, I feel like the reviews of the class, it's just kind of all over the place. Some people think it's bad. Others think that they're undervalued just overall. If you were to sort of rate it from 0 to 10, where would this class land? And then how does that compare to recent classes? Last year, for the record, Jim came on this show last year and had Jaden Daniels as QB1 and was pounding the table for Daniels. And you liked the QB class last year a decent bit. This year, though, where does that compare even to last year or the year before that?
It's definitely a lot short of that. So, you look at the guys who are well-rated in this year's class, the model loves Cam Ward, we'll talk about that later, likes Jackson Dart, we'll talk about that. Everyone else who's, getting some, day 2 buzz, Quinn Ewers, Jalen Milroe, Tyler Shuck we talked about, Shedeur Sanders, it's a lot lower on those guys. Whereas you look at the depth last year, the model wasn't as high in Drake May, but it still had him inside the 75th percentile, which would be number 3 of the top end guys in this class. Now, there are some guys who are above there who are going to be lower end grades, but it's just not very deep. And if you look at, again, the well-rated guys in terms of scouting, a lot of them rank lower. So a 2.5 out of 10, probably. Okay. Only 2 guys in general above the 85th percentile. That includes everybody invited to the Combine. Only 2 guys above the 85th percentile, which is where that, you find the superstars, is 85th percentile or higher. So it has a lot of okay players, a lot of guys who are fine, sure, day 2, day 3 kind of guys, but if you're looking at like the archetype of successful analytical hits at quarterback, it's really, really lacking.
All right, let's talk about those two guys, because I think that people are going to be not shocked necessarily, but at least surprised. And I think it's okay that people would feel surprised because you can obviously explain it and talk through it. Yeah. But, right now, Cam Ward, I'd say unbelievably good chance that he goes first overall in this draft. So he's going to be the Titans starting quarterback, or eventually starting quarterback. I would imagine he's probably going to start pretty quickly. But he's not your model's top quarterback. Let the audience know who your number one quarterback is.
Yeah, sheepishly, it's Jackson Dart. And I it's important to acknowledge this is not my personal rankings. I would put Cam Ward first, but like, I do think that what the model is saying, that Dart is a worthy first-round pick, if that's like our thesis, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Because let's go back to our like overall what we want. We want young, experienced, and efficient. And Jackson Dart is all three of those things. If you look back at all the quarterbacks in my model, which is 263 total, only 9 of them have been invited to the combine with at least 30 games with 10 plus pass attempts. They've been younger than 22 on day one of the draft, had a total QBR of at least 80 in their final year in college. Those 9 quarterbacks are Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson, my boy Jared Goff, my other unfortunate boy, Marcus Mariota, Teddy Bridgewater, and Jackson Dart. And that's not like a cherry-picked number either. Like, Dart has 45 games, whereas this was 30 was the benchmark. He had an 86 total QBR. This is 80 the benchmark. He'll be 21.9 on day one of the draft, but he was a 4-year starter at 2 different Power 5 schools. So it's really hard for the model not to like a guy when you're going to check all those boxes. The only non-first round pick in that bucket was Jalen Hurts. And Daniel Jeremiah compared Dart to Hurts. I think that Dart himself at the combine interviews compared himself to Hurts too. And honestly, like, that's my top comp for them too, just from like a numbers perspective. Stylistically, he's not squatting 650. I don't know, but maybe he is. But not stylistically, but from a numbers perspective, they are both guys who started right away. They started all 4 years. They had to transfer at a certain point, but transferred to another school as a Power 5 school, continued to start there, put up really good numbers, and were younger than 22 when they came out. So I think it's a comp that makes a lot of sense. Now, what you'll see, the counterpoint to Dart, is that Lane Kiffin offenses don't translate to the NFL. And like, in theory, that's true, but the sample of quarterbacks who have been in a Lane Kiffin offense and then invited to the combine is 2. Those guys are Matt Barkley and Matt Corral. Corral was like 24 and still hadn't graduated from Ole Miss yet, which was weird. Like, Sam Howell was like 20 years old and he's at the Senior Bowl, but Matt Corral was not eligible that year. I don't know. It was weird. It was a very weird thing to me. Should have been a red flag that Matt Corral might bust. But he was older. He had 14 fewer games of experience. His adjusted yards per attempt was 2.3 yards lower than Dart's was. And then Barkley was pretty young still and pretty experienced, but also didn't have anywhere near the efficiency. His total QBR 15 points lower than Dart's was. So I don't think it's very fair to lump him in with them. It's fair to think if he will struggle to transition because there is a lot of play action. They're very good at getting guys open in that Ole Miss offense, but he checks a lot of important and fun boxes. And because we've seen guys like Hurts and Wilson rate out well in the model, go low in the draft, and still be successes, I personally don't want to give up a hope on Dart, even if he does wind up slipping outside the first round.
Yeah, the other thing that I'm thinking, this is more of a real football stance and standpoint, and I'm thinking this a little bit selfishly. I don't say this very often on the show, but the Steelers are technically my team, right? I grew up a big Steelers fan. I grew up in Pittsburgh. And, on the Late Round podcast, I don't care to be biased either way, because I just through doing this I've just become less of a fan because I just enjoy other teams. Like teenager JJ would hate the fact that I enjoy the Ravens, but with that being said, it feels like Jackson Dart would be a perfect player to fall in the 20s, right, where the Steelers are drafting, where he's not even necessarily starting right away. Let's say that they get Aaron Rodgers, because we're recording this before any of that would potentially happen. But it feels like that would, it makes sense in that sort of scenario. So you're saying that in the 20s is a perfect spot for Dart to get drafted?
I pray it goes specifically to the Steelers. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Good infrastructure. I like the moves they made along their offensive line. Like long term, I think they're going to be solid up there once they get healthy. And like, again, you talked about the successful, like the young, experienced, efficient guys, like they didn't all go high. Mahomes went 10th. Deshaun Watson went 12th. Lamar Jackson went 32nd.
Right.
So like they don't have to go top 5 to be hits. That was more true in the past where it's like you got to be the first overall pick to be good. That's been less true recently. It's been less true specifically for these younger, experienced, efficient guys because they may not have had the top end efficiency, but they were efficient enough for how young and experienced they were.
Right. The age adjusted production was
Exactly.
elite, but maybe they didn't hit that like Joe Burrow-esque type season.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Makes sense. So number 2 in the model and from an analytics perspective, you have Cam Ward. Talk about him a little bit. I mean, do you think that he's close to Dart, like score wise and analytically? And then do you think that, between the two, let's say that both of them are starting. Okay. And let's just say that they're comparable enough from a passing perspective. Which one do you think might bring a little bit more juice for fantasy football purposes, whether it's like big playability, rushing ability, all of that?
So they both run, which is really fun, actually. So I would say like it could be both in that regard. Like Dart is a good athlete. He is aggressive. Cam Ward is chaotic in a very fun way. So like I think that both could be really fun. And part of it's because my model does like both. Like yes, Cam Ward's number 2 in this class and it's a bad class, but he's also 96th percentile, 9th all time in this. So like he is a really good quarterback prospect and he's better than the average first overall pick. So looking at, again, this subset since 2010 on, he has our first overall picks have been in the 90th percentile of the model. Only Jameis Winston was below the 86th percentile. So Ward is better than the average first overall pick. He's a little bit older, 22.9 years old, but that's between the ages of Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels entering last year. He, again, the league average for a first round pick is 22.3 years old. Again, Ward is 22.9. But as we saw with Daniels, it's not an issue if you're experienced and efficient, and Ward was that. So I think that he checks a lot of key boxes. And also, subjectively, he's super fun to watch.
Yeah.
It's like, if you ever had like too much espresso on an empty stomach, that's what watching Cam Ward is like. It's like, okay, I can't tell if I'm about to have a panic attack or like if I'm enjoying this, but it's kind of both. And so like, I want him to be good. I think he's good based on what the numbers say. And I think even though it's a not a good quarterback class, even though he's number 2 in this class, I do think that I personally am higher on Cam Ward than the market. You look like big board rankings. He's like 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there in the consensus big board rankings. I think he should be like top 3 personally.
Okay. So that's good. So that means too that both of these guys are top 10 since 2010 pre-draft wise.
Correct. Yep. And then it's a big fall off after that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about that fall off. So Shedeur Sanders, he's typically ranked as the number 2 quarterback. Again, I think that his ranking among draft analysts varies more because like a lot of people will have Jackson Dart in like that late first-ish kind of area into the second round. A lot of people will have Cam Ward, going or being like a top, like you said, top 5, top 10 guy. Shedeur Sanders is just all over the place. Like people either love or hate him. And so your model has him as QB4 pre-draft. So can you talk about what's sort of scaring maybe you off, but at least the model off?
So I definitely get scared off too. I think the model gets more scared off of Shedeur than I do. I'd rank him QB3. Will Howard's above him in the model, and I'd rank Shedeur above Howard personally. But I do think that the red flags raised by his analytical profile are legitimate. And it's weird because like you hear the narratives around Sanders and the data actually converges perfectly with all the narratives, where the narrative is he is the best passer in this class. 100% accurate. He is extremely accurate. He ranked 2nd in passing EPA in the country last year, according to ESPN's data. So, like, very good thrower of the football, very good processor and stuff like that. But the other narratives are that he takes way too many sacks and he does not run, doesn't add value with his legs. So he's kind of like a 1980s or a 1990s ideal of a quarterback where he's going to win from the pocket, probably not going to do a whole lot else for you. It doesn't have a lot of the physical tools that you want. If you look at, again, EPA, he lost the 4th most EPA due to sacks in the entire country. And part of that's because they threw a lot, so there's volume, but also the offensive line, 51st pass blocking grade at PFF. So, like, yeah, they weren't amazing. But also, like, when you're watching Shedeur, there are so many times where he tries to run backwards to escape, and he kind of compounds these issues with sacks. And so if you look at Shedeur in obvious passing situations, so third or fourth down, 6+ yards to go, he had negative 84 rushing yards last year. And that's because you lose yardage for sacks, but that's also, if you look at drafted FBS quarterbacks since 2011, that is the second worst number of all time, ahead of only Tom Savage. And Tom Savage ain't an athlete.
Yeah,
so
I know Tom Savage well.
Right,
yes.
Exactly. So that's the area that Shedeur is in. If you're looking at successful first-round picks, nobody's been lower in that metric than negative 35. And Shedeur is 50 yards below that number. He's still in the 72nd percentile of yards per play in those situations, so his passing does help, but it is also below both Cam Ward and Jackson Dart in that specific number. And you look at those numbers, they all hurt his QBR. That values rushing, values sacks. He's also older, 23.2 years old. He's actually older than Cam Ward, despite the fact that Cam Ward was in college for 5 years and Shedeur was there for 4 years. So below average efficiency, he was there. He's a little bit older than you'd like. So he's checking only one of the boxes, and that box is experience. I don't mind if you miss one box. Most quarterbacks do, but missing two is a pretty big concern. So let's contextualize this. 71st percentile of the model. Since 2010, there have been 6 quarterbacks drafted inside the top 5 who are below the 80th percentile of the model. And those guys are Jameis Winston, Carson Wentz, Mitch Trubisky, Sam Darnold, Drake May, and Anthony Richardson. Those guys have combined for one top 10 season in total EPA across the entirety of their careers. It was Carson Wentz the year he tore his ACL. Darnold was outside the top 10 this year even, despite playing with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Kevin O'Connell in a dome, still outside the top 10 in total EPA. So yes, Shedeur Sanders can be good. The model whiffed badly on Josh Allen and Jordan Love. It's been too high on other guys too, like Marcus Mariota. But and the passing is good enough where you can buy in, but the age, the sack issues, the lack of rushing, those concerns do add up a lot for me relative to where guys who go high in the draft would normally be.
So I haven't looked into this, and maybe you haven't either, but I'll throw it out there. The pressure to sack stuff became a really big deal last year. There was a lot of good research on it. A lot of smart people were tweeting about it and writing about it more last couple of years, let's say. Is Sanders the pressure to sack ratio poster child in this draft class?
In this draft class, he probably would be. Part of that's because, I guess Jalen Milroe and Jackson Dart do take more sacks than you would hope. But with Shedeur, I think the bigger issue is how many pressures he invites. So pressure to sack is he uses pressures as the subset, but he just invites a lot of pressures. And according to PFF data, he was responsible himself for a lot of those pressures by holding the ball too long. I also did look into it last year and couldn't quite be sold on pressure to sack is one step, because I want to see if I should include him in the model.
Exactly.
It didn't quite do enough for me because the third highest number among first round picks, not including last year's class, because Jaden Daniels would have been above this, but Baker Mayfield had a high pressure to sack ratio. So did Justin Herbert. So did Joe Burrow. So did Lamar Jackson. So did Josh Allen. And then guys who were good in that metric are Josh Rosen, Anthony Richardson. Yeah, you have Mahomes up there. Mac Jones is up there. But then it's Mac Jones, Carson Wentz. Yeah. So it's it's very mixed, and I didn't see enough in the data to convince me to actually put it in the model.
That's good to know. That's really good to know. You did mention Will Howard as the pre-draft QB3, but you would have Shedeur ahead of him from a rankings perspective. Do you see Howard as a potential legitimate starter, or is he closer to sort of the rest, just guys who are probably going to be more backups?
Yeah, probably more in the backup, if I had to guess. He does at least check 2 of the boxes because he is experienced, 45 games played. He's efficient. He actually led the nation in total QBR once you count in what he did during the playoffs, which was really fun to watch. But he's 23.6 years old. That's on the older end. And again, he does have the experience at least. But so I think that with Howard, I will let draft capital dictate where I go with him because from a fantasy perspective, because the numbers aren't pounding the table for him, whereas they are for Dart. Mm-hmm. For Dart, sure. Yeah, no, I'll be willing to buy in there. Howard's in the 83rd percentile. That's good for a non-first round pick, but it's also not the superstar threshold. So I think with him, he's a guy where I will let draft capital dictate how I handle him because the analytical profile is not good enough to convince me that people may be off on him.
I got to also ask you about Jalen Milroe because he is very, very athletic. And that is very, very good from a fantasy football perspective. So what do you see as sort of the pros and cons of his profile? And is he someone that, in a Superflex rookie draft, we're sitting in, let's say the early parts of round 2 or the middle parts of round 2, is that around the spot that people are going to or should be throwing darts his way?
I'd want to wait longer personally. Okay. And honestly, I don't never wind up getting non-first round picks in my Superflex drafts, which is sometimes a bummer. Like I'd love to get a Hurts every now and then, but I tend to value draft capital so much that I don't get there with non-first round picks specifically. But with Milroe, model's like on him, 64th percentile. He's not super old at 22.4 years old, but also not super young, considering he has just 27 games with 10 plus pass attempts. He also just did have the narrative aligns here too, where he did have a down year. Total QBR 78.3, and that counts in what he did with his legs. So that considers the rushing as well. But also if you dig more into the splits, he did struggle in a lot of concerning situations, like really bad numbers when they trailed, really bad numbers against good opponents, and only in the 58th percentile in yards per play in obvious passing situations, behind Quinn Ewers, Will Howard, Dylan Gabriel, Riley Leonard, all guys who could go also day 2, day 3 undrafted kind of guys. So it could happen because he's got tools, he's got athleticism. That's kind of the stuff that helped Josh Allen and Jordan Love break the model. But the model doesn't view him as being a guy who's super likely to make a difference. So I'd need, let's say he goes round 2, I'd probably need him to slip to the 3rd round, especially with how many running backs there are in this class. Yeah. I think I'd need him to slip a bit more.
That's the thing. That's going to be the hardest part to kind of balance is how many of those running backs end up going day 2. All right, last question for you. Any other quarterbacks you want to shout out that people should at least have on their radar right now?
Yeah, I think it's worth talking a bit more about Shuck, just because he'll get the draft capital, and so people will probably want to take swipes at him. I'm probably going to let them take swipes at him because, again, 25.6 years old, 4th oldest quarterback at the Combine. Luckily, to make us feel a bit younger, he'll probably be the last ever quarterback drafted who was born before 2000. So thank you, Tyler Shuck, for making us feel younger for a bit longer. But let's say hypothetically, the Titans draft Cam Ward. Day 1 starter. Shuck would be older than every starting quarterback in the AFC South, including Trevor Lawrence. He is older than a third of the league as far as starters go. I think it's 11 quarterbacks now that J.J. McCarthy's going to start for the Vikings. So 25th percentile guy in the model, even if he gets top end around 2 draft capital, I'm probably okay missing out there personally.
Jim, this was awesome. It's always great doing shows with you after so many of them through the years. Thank you so much for your time. Greatly, greatly appreciated. Anyone not following Jim and his work at FanDuel, make sure you change that right now. Check him out at Jim Sonis on Twitter. And I'm on there too at Late Round QB. And make sure you check out the Late Round Prospect Guide. We're less than a month away from the draft. You'll want to read that pre-draft version before the draft officially hits. You want to get prepared. That's over on lateround.com. But thanks for listening, everyone. I'll be back at it with late round perspectives later this week. I'll talk to you then.